Hello everyone, welcome to Total Participation Techniques with William and Pérsida Himmele. My name is Leslie Welch. I'm a web producer at ASCD. And now it is my pleasure to turn the presentation over to Bill and Pérsida because they are going to introduce each other and they will do a much better job than I ever could. So, Bill and Pérsida.
Hi, welcome to Total Participation Techniques. Let me introduce my husband, Bill. Dr. William Himmele is an associate professor and the coordinator for the ESL certificate program at Millersville University in southeastern Pennsylvania. He is a former speech and ESL teacher in New York and Southern California, and he has served as a teacher trainer and an educational consultant for various school districts and educational projects in the United States, Puerto Rico, Chile, Fiji, Trinidad and Tobago, Korea, China, Nepal, and Thailand. He earned an MA in TESOL, teaching English to speakers of other languages, and a PhD in intercultural education from Himmele University. Bill is a lifelong Buffalo Bills and Buffalo Sabres fan and keeps hoping for a brighter day.
Okay, greetings. I'm going to now introduce Dr. Pérsida Himmele. She is an associate professor in the education department at Millersville University in southeastern Pennsylvania. She's been a teacher in bilingual and multilingual classrooms in New York and Southern California. She has also been a district administrator serving ELL students in high-incident district and has served as a national and international consultant. Pérsida has a PhD in intercultural education from Biola University and a master's in bilingual and elementary education from SUNY Buffalo. She was born in the Bronx, is Puerto Rican, and was raised on Bustelo coffee. And together we have co-authored the ASCD books, Total Participation Techniques, Making Every Student an Active Learner in a Language-Rich Classroom, a research-based framework for teaching English language learners.
Okay, Bobo. Bobo is a three-legged canine of undetermined pedigree who was adopted from the local rescue. He enjoys sleeping, going bye-bye, and sleeping. He'll be joining us today, and don't worry, he doesn't talk much. Okay, thanks, Bobo.
Thank you, baby. What drove us to write this book is that while we saw a lot of good teaching where there's a lot of carefully prepared lessons, we noticed that teachers typically didn't have evidence of who was engaged and who was participating during their lessons. And then they would often make that faulty assumption that because those answers that they asked were answered correctly, the students were all engaged and they were all listening. When you do look at lessons that include those effective checks for understanding, there tend to be about 10 times as cost-effective as reducing class size, would add between 6 and 9 months of additional learning per year, and students would learn 4 times as fast as a result of its constant use.
Okay. In Chapter 1 of the book, we go into quite a bit into the dropout statistics and the toll that's taking on our society. Every 9 seconds, a student drops out. The number one reason cited for dropping out is boredom. And so when we look at total participation techniques, engagement really can make a difference. Overall, in terms of nationally, we have a 30% U.S. dropout rate in K-12 schools. 48% of those are Latinos, 49% are African American. So we're looking at a huge disparity, a huge achievement gap that I think we can really make an effort at bridging by the use of total participation techniques. When we look at the studies and initiatives that look at dropout and ways to solve the problem, over and over and throughout various dropout studies and initiatives, engagement is commonly cited as a key ingredient in addressing the dropout problem. If you'd like some examples of that, you can go to pages 5 and 6 of our book, and you can see some of those.
And we really believe that the solution toward the problem of disengagement and dropout is by teachers using what we call total participation techniques, which is active participation plus that cognitive engagement. And that's being done by 100% of the students that are giving you the evidence that they are with the teacher, that they're not zoning, they're tracking, and they're getting that instruction that's being provided for them. And we also believe that not only will the students get the better concepts, information being provided by the teacher, but also there will be better management as well because students aren't going to have opportunities to get into trouble because they're going to be constantly giving that teacher evidence that they are with them and participating throughout the lesson. The book, Total Participation Techniques, was when we worked with Manheim Central Middle School, which is in southeastern Pennsylvania, and we worked with 8 teachers specifically. And they include a total of 37 TPTs in the book with examples and suggestions for developing that higher order thinking.
Okay. When we look at total participation techniques, we're looking at 2 things. Again, just like Bill said in the slide, evidence of active participation and cognitive engagement from all students at the same time. And that sounds too good to be true. Total participation techniques are really not that difficult to implement. Very simple. Oftentimes can be done right on the spot.
Most teachers, we believe and have observed through our many years of being in the classroom, is that when they know they're not supposed to just drone on and on and on for 45-minute lessons. They're supposed to check for understanding at 10, 12, 15 minutes. And many times what they'll do is they'll simply throw out that one question that they have in their mind. They'll see which hands are raised. They'll call on that student who has the hand raised. And typically that student knows the answer, which is why they have their hand raised. They're often not going to say, I was zoning and not paying attention to you. And unless you're in that kindergarten classroom, and I do remember distinctly being in a kindergarten classroom and asking a question, and 23 out of 24 hands are raised, and I think I'm such a good teacher, and then I'll say, oh, does this have anything to do with what we're talking about? And then you would see 23 hands go down, or you might have one that's still being raised. But other than that context of that kindergarten classroom, students are not going to raise their hand and say, I wasn't paying attention to you, or I'm not thinking in that higher order that you have asked me to do. And we sort of picture that like a teacher is that every 10, 12, 15 minutes throwing out like a beach ball to that one student, asking that one question, and then getting that proper response back, and then making a faulty assumption that they are right on with effective instruction for all because they had their questions answered.
Well, instead of the beach ball, let me just click here. We ask you to visualize it as a ripple. So if you have 29 students, you would need 29 pebbles. So you're going to get 29 plunks of the pebble. In other words, you're going to prompt the prompts that you prepare. Your higher order thinking prompt is going to be processed in 3 ways. First, you're going to start with the individual student. So all 29 of them are going to get to process that prompt, that higher order thinking prompt. They can do that through quick write or quick draw or some other way. Before you go to pairs or small groups, so you notice you're rippling out. And then finally, you go to the whole group. So when we talk about the beach ball is starting with the whole group first. And so it really does a disservice to students who need more think time, more time to process, even those kids who are shy. But in particular, if you're looking at ELLs or students with IEPs, they're really going to benefit from this opportunity to first individually process that prompt and then work in pairs or small groups so that they can bounce ideas off each other and enrich their answers with those from their classmates before bringing it to the whole group. And when you bring it to the whole group, at that point, they're much more ready to engage, much more ready to participate because you've given them time to think through it.
The next slide that you now see is our model for looking at higher order and participation. You can see the 2 continuums there, the higher order, lower order, and low participation and high participation. This is in the 2nd chapter in our book. And to see, I want to go through and explain the quadrants and an example activity that you might see within each of those quadrants.
Okay. If we look at the 4 quadrants, again, we're just looking at higher order thinking, lower order thinking, and a continuum across low participation and high participation. If you look at quadrant 1 in the bottom, you have low cognition, low participation, basically very low investment. And it's that beach ball scenario that Bill was describing, where who was our first president? And we have 4 students raise their hand and tell you that it was George Washington. And then it's lower order and very little evidence on the part of the rest of the class. In the second quadrant, you have a lot of participation. You have lower order thinking, though, so the staying power and the ability of students to really memorize and for that understanding to really stick is compromised. It can be a lot of fun, but it's not always very meaningful. So you're probably looking at a lot of fun, engaging activities, but not a whole lot of staying power. In quadrant 3, we talk in the book about the receivement gap. And with the receivement gap, you've got some higher order thinking, some great questions prepared by the teacher. Only a few students are benefiting from that. Got low participation. So those 3 brave kids that raise their hands or that are always with you are going to get the learning that the others, the majority of the class, usually doesn't. And so you don't have evidence really that more than just a few are processing that prompt. And then finally, in the fourth quadrant, you have high participation and higher order thinking. So you're looking at now students processing it in heavy ways, and so just a lot more staying power. In the book, we have a sample lesson described by it's Courtney Sislow's 5th grade lesson on judgment from Manheim Central Middle School. If you look at the left-hand column, you'll notice that every few minutes, her lesson is chopped up, kind of analyzed in terms of which quadrant it is working in. And so you'll notice she does all 4 quadrants, but she keeps bouncing back to quadrant 4. So she keeps throwing in these TPTs so that she has evidence of active participation from all students and active participation functioning in higher order thinking. I want to encourage you to take a look at that lesson. It's figure 2.1 in the book, and even if you would just visualize yourself using these quadrants to do some peer coaching where you're sitting with a colleague and you're observing their lesson and they get to observe yours, and just analyze it in terms of what quadrant were they working in and provide feedback, pointed feedback in terms of how they might have used TPTs, certain TPTs that could have supported something, or how they did this well, or could have tweaked this in that way. If you're a school leader, I encourage you to use these quadrants and this quadrant analysis in terms of your pre-observations and post-observations. What you want is for teachers and to be constantly going back to quadrant 4. Now we're going to get into some of the TPTs.
In the rest of our time now together, we're going to be cherry picking and basically having you do or walk you through 5 of the TPTs that we highlight in the book. And the it's called Chalkboard. The first one's called Chalkboard Splash, Quick Draw, Bounce Cards, AZ Wrap Up, and then the Holdup. The first one that we're going to be talking about is called the Chalkboard Splash. And a Chalkboard Splash is basically where a teacher's going to be given a prompt for the students to go and to stand up and then walk over to the whiteboard, chalkboard, and then answer that prompt on the space provided in their classroom. As with many of these TPTs, they are little to no preparation can be done on the fly. And so you can often, with the TPTs, you can maybe have them built into the lesson that you're teaching, or you can just see if your students are zoning out, paying attention, just real quickly do one of these that we're going to be showing you, and then instantly you're going to be getting that evidence of who's engaged, who's participating, are they doing that cognitive engagement or not. Once the TPT the prompt has been given, the students go over again and they go to the chalkboard and again write it down, or you can use large paper as well. And what we want you to do is in the dialog box, if you could please answer this TPT prompt for us. During my own K-12 experiences, TPTs could have helped me in 1, science, 2, math, 3, history, 4 social behavior, or 5 other. We'll give you a moment just to do this.
Okay, we're coming in.
Yeah. See a lot of math.
Math. It's interesting.
Yeah. Very good.
Okay.
You can see in the next slide some examples that we got at some teacher workshops that we've done. Your TPTs could have helped me in. And just as many of you are also identifying as well, you see a lot of the math of social studies there, which I think is to be expected. This is also another prompt that we did regarding one of our workshops. If every teacher in the building were to consistently use TPTs, the results would be, and again, you can see that the responses that they provided there for us.
Okay. Can I just flip? I just want to flip back 2 slides here and just say this is what it physically looks like. And children will often have a tendency of lining up behind each other to answer a question. So you want to make sure you remind them, find any open spot on the chalkboard and write your response. So you give them a half a sentence and you have them finish it up.
Children love to write on the chalkboard, whiteboard, and we can take advantage of that and use it as a wonderful way to check for that evidence of understanding and that participation. Now, I will say that you can only do this if you don't cover up all your chalkboard, whiteboard space. A lot of classrooms I'm in, I see that they've used it as a bulletin board. If you cover it up completely, you're not going to be able to use that to check for that understanding. Once students have answered that prompt, the chalkboard, whiteboard, then the students can look for similarities. They then can go back to their small group and their table and they can write a sentence summary on the similarities that they saw, and then the teacher then would be able to then call on those respective small groups and then hear what they wrote for their sentence summary. And this is where they get that engagement, that participation, that talking through what they learn. And then you just see a lot of neat things blossom as they are able to share and talk and then share to the bigger group what they've been learning throughout the lesson.
Okay, so here is an example of this particular activity modified a bit by Gail Denuzzo in Avon Grove, and she's using chart paper, and instead of the children moving, she brings them the chart paper and moves them from table to table. So there's one modification for that. Gail also actually assigns them a color, so each student has a color to work with, and she's able to identify who wrote what. The same is true Angela DiLoretto. Same thing over in 2nd grade. Each student is traveling in groups and they're answering certain prompts. So every time they move to a new chart paper, they have a new prompt. And so just a modification of a Chalkboard Splash where you can use more prompts at this point. Bill's going to share another TPT,
which is called a quick draw. And the quick draw is simply where you're asking your students to visually draw out concepts or target words that they are learning. And as opposed to verbally giving a response or writing it down, when this person draws out what they're learning, they're using and accessing different parts of their brain. That really helps solidify this concept or target words that we're trying to get in with our kiddos. I love it. Again, little to no preparation, and you can just see some wonderful responses. And what we would like you to do is on a scrap paper somewhere, wherever you're at, we want you to create a visual, draw a picture that for you captures the essence of vulnerability. Okay, so think through what picture for you right now would represent vulnerability. I'll give you just a moment. Once you have drawn your picture, and if there's any elbow buddies alongside it, proudly show your picture to your elbow buddy. The example we're going to now show you is Brahms, which is a 6th grader drawing of what for him meant vulnerability. And I just love this because he personalized this big old concept of vulnerability. And if you're not familiar with the Star Wars world, there's a Death Star, and for him, vulnerability was armor which is energy core plus being shot at equals a goner. And I just love it how he's able to personalize for vulnerability. So again, on the fly, no preparation. You can do that many different facets, those different content areas. I just, the other day in one of my undergrad literacy courses, I had them draw out the word crescendo using the seasons, using weather, using colors to how they're able to process and think through the word crescendo. So that's quick draw.
Yeah, and the quick draw is one of the just a really powerful activity. And if you're thinking that, well, I'm not sure that would work in my content area is assessment, and I use it all the time. So, for example, just recently I had students draw an example of reliability. So I wanted them to show me in a picture what reliability looked like. And validity, the same for validity. So you can take these great abstract concepts and demonstrate it with a picture. And it fits more than you would think. Okay. There we go. Here's a quick draw with first graders in the Avon Grove School District. And you'll notice that they all have clipboards. If you're working with primary grades, you might want to invest in clipboards for each of your students. It just makes it so much more easy for them to make drawings, and you don't have holdups for them to, for example, lose little pieces. We're going to talk about that in a minute, but clipboards are great.
The next technique are called bounce cards and turn and talk to use with that pre-K to second grade. And Pérsida, why don't you walk us through what those are and how they would look like in the classroom.
Okay, the bounce cards came about as a result of working with Keely Potter and Megan Babcock at Manheim Central. And we noticed that something as simple as a pair share was kind of falling flat without a scaffold. So we developed these bounce cards as a scaffold to really support sixth graders as they were talking to each other. And they have just these brief little sentence starters that allow them to have a meaningful conversation when they're pair sharing. The students did use them and just found that it was really helpful. What we've noticed right now, we're working in a K-2 building in Avon Grove, and some of the pictures you've seen are from that. And we have basically learned that they really do need to physically turn and talk. And I know that's not a new discovery for many of you, but definitely it needs to be scaffolded, something as simple as a pair share. Children actually need to be taught how to sit, how to turn their bodies, how to talk. And so the bounce cards serve in that way for third grade and up, and for kindergarten to second modeling is a great tool as well. You have the bounce cards in your handouts. It's a great scaffold. And so our next strategy is going to be the hold up.
Yeah, and the hold up are definitely one of our favorites. Well, now, if we were actually in a workshop, we would actually having you cut out in some handouts the L, the E, the J for that hold up that we're going to be doing in just a second. But obviously, because we had to tweak this for a webinar, we didn't do that. But before we do go on, I do want to say that when you're having your students cut out, for instance, words or in some way some target words or concepts, and you're having them actually take class time to cut and to arrange, that's not in any way wasted time. When you're giving your students those opportunities to cut out those letters or those words or concepts that you're teaching them, you're allowing them to get ready for the lesson that you're going to be having them do. So we really believe that that is in no way wasted time in terms of how the teacher arranges that lesson. Now, what we're going to, if in case you can't quite remember our government and the different parts, we've got the cheat sheets there for you. So what I'm going to be doing is giving you a prompt, and then I want you to, with your L, E, J, to hold up what letter that would represent what part of government. Okay? And the first prompt is every state has at least 3 representatives that sit on this branch.
You're going to be using a poll.
Mm-hmm. So decide which one it is. Is it legislative, executive, or judicial?
Very interesting.
Yes, I can see there's about 1 out of every 10 could go for it. Very good. All right. The second prompt. 9 people serve on this team. They're appointed by the president and approved by the Senate. And the third prompt.
Great.
Which of these 3 branches would you say plays the biggest role in ensuring a balance of power? Be ready to defend.
We'll give you a little more time on this one.
And if you do happen to have an elbow buddy there with you, you might share your answer. And which one do you think plays the biggest role in the balance of power, and how come?
Okay, great. It looks like we've got 32% legislative, 24% executive, 35% judicial, and this is typically what happens in our classrooms as well. 9% could use a quadruple shot latte with no milk. Wow.
And the teacher wouldn't be moving on until he or she seeing that all the students are holding up that card. And again, this is the whole idea of total participation techniques. Every single student is showing you exactly what they're thinking, what they're processing right now. The next slide is ways that you can tweak holdups, and they don't always have to just be true or not true, or yes or no. You can use true with modifications or unable to determine. And we find a lot of times that is really where you get some wonderful discussions in terms of what the students are thinking and how they're processing. So don't be afraid to tweak it and let them come up with some of the ways that, to show how they're thinking through what you've given them.
Okay, the true, not true hold-up card, and even the that third question that was on the legislative, executive, judicial option, they just provide a great opportunity for students to get into that higher order thinking. So even though they are getting one response, it's still a great opportunity for them to really become engaged, to think at higher order thinking. You're getting evidence of learning, and the students are learning from each other. That interaction is probably the most important piece of a hold-up. Let me just read you a quote here. When we take a look at the types of teaching that high school students want, they describe their preferred instructional strategies as ones that were hands-on and that contained opportunities for debate and discussion. And this is cited in our book, but just kids really do want to debate. They want to talk about it and become engaged, passionate about what they're learning.
And you could even have a small group of just 4 or 5 students, 6 students, and if you're still throwing on a beach ball, other than that one, you don't know the other students in the small group who's listening, who's zoning, who's participating, who's not. So yeah, we've been seeing teachers effectively use these in small groups as well. It does not always have to be a large group working with those TPT, working with those holdups.
Okay, here's a holdup. Sorry, let me get the screen. There we go. We want to simplify the holdups. The younger the students get, Nancy Rowan over in Avon Grove School District taught a kindergarten lesson using a Mrs. Wishy-Washy book. Simple yes/no holdups, and she would take it to higher order by the different questions that she would ask, but sometimes just simple comprehension questions as well. As the students get more able to see each other with her higher order questions, the first time that you ask, you're going to find that they all are still used to wanting to be right, to have the right answer. But as you start validating responses and students start realizing that either one of the answers could be correct, depending on the justification, they start taking more risks. So here is a modified holdup again, Nancy Rowan at Avon Grove School District. In here, you'll see again the clipboard and the spring clip. And there's a reason for this. Instead, now we're working with kindergartners. And so that they don't have a bunch of cards that they're crumpling up and losing, just management issues, this is a great way to simplify the holdup using what she called the learning board and a spring clip. So here it is with the scaffolds of the pictures. And here it is without, and as our class sizes get really big lately, like the budget cuts and everything. It's even more important to get that evidence from every student. Here it is with beginning, middle, and ending sounds. And Nancy Rowan actually used inferencing with vocabulary words into her book.
And our fifth and final technique that we're going to be showing you is called A to Z sentence summaries.
All right, these A to Z sentence summaries are like a chalkboard splash. They, what you do is you ask your students to wrap up TPTs in a sentence, or wrap up whatever the topic you're teaching in a sentence. In this case, obviously the content is TPTs that we're talking about. Wrap it up in a sentence. You give each student a magnetic letter, and you can find these scrapbooking letters at Walmart or regular department stores, and put a magnetic tape on the back, and they can be as cheap as $2 for an entire set. Here's what it looks like. To finish, when students walk up, they randomly place their letters and write their sentences. And to debrief it, what you do is you call out in alphabetical order. You call out the letters, and then the students read their sentences out loud. So you start with A, and then A reads their sentence. B reads it nice and loud, and it just takes a couple minutes to get through the entire alphabet. So that's the A to Z sentence wrap-up. Okay. When you think about TPTs, it really is a mindset. For example, when you're teaching your lesson, think, how can I get evidence of participation and cognitive engagement from all my students? In this particular activity, Nancy Rowan handed out plastic little figures, and she asked students to find on the book what made them think that XYZ was going to happen. And some of the students put their little figures on the picture, some part of the picture that gave them that and information, and some of them who were a little more advanced were able to actually put it right on the text, and here's a photograph of that. So the animals became basically the tool that she was using for TPTs. It really is something that if you start, there's a, Megan Babcock talks about how it becomes a mindset where you just start using TPTs as an impromptu. And the other day I observed a lesson that was in kindergarten teaching before, in between, and after. And just as simple as having the entire class point to the student before, point to the students in between, and those after.
When we were writing our book, we heard so many wonderful examples of students who tend to be the ones not to raise a hand or share an answer, and then they got to participate as much as other students. And just how they described how they viewed themselves so differently as a learner, as a student in that classroom. It's just wonderful testimonies when teachers consistently use these TPTs and allow those students who typically do not get a chance to share, don't get a chance to show and celebrate the learning that's going on in their head, just what they are able to bring to the table when they're allowed to do that, and just wonderful testimonies from the students. The next picture we have is of me on a bad hair day holding up my TPT folder, and in the third chapter we talk about that teachers can be creating these folders, if you will, for their students that allows them to use these techniques on the fly. These folders can be, if it's big enough for the older students, they can maybe go into a folder, they can take them to different classes, different teachers. If for the younger ones, maybe something they're going to actually have attached actually physically to the chair. Some of the things that we identify and talk about in that third chapter is maybe the dry erase crayon that you can see there, a little picture of, and those are wonderful. If you haven't gotten to use those are wonderful. You can cut them in half, break them in half, and use them. You can see as well the laminated piece of white paper that they can use as a dry erase, if you will, various holdups that they might be using, and you decide what would be most effective for the student TPT folder. If you're counting numbers, maybe 1 to 100, we maybe mentioned, or possibly the periodic table for the upper grades. So you're going to be deciding on what is the most effective for them to create and to put inside the TPT folder.
Yeah, we encourage you to look at that Chapter 3. It has lots of lists of different items. I just want to repeat those Crayola dry erase markers. Dry erase crayons. We just love them. They are cheap and they last longer than dry erase markers. Okay.
Again, our book, Total Participation Techniques, has 37 techniques, and we divide these techniques, these strategies for on-the-spot TPTs, TPTs for guided note-taking, concept analysis, TPTs involving movement, and Holdups as well. And they all include these examples and samples that we really do flesh out there for you.
Just want to talk. Oh, actually, Bobo.
Yeah, I think Bobo has something to say.
He wants to know how many copies do you think that they will need to purchase each? Okay, so there you go.
All right, that's an excellent point, Bobo. You're correct. They're great for Christmas, Kwanzaa, Hanukkah, Ramadan. They make great personal gifts. Yep, there you go. Nice, thanks, Bobo.
All right. We're never going to make it as comedians, so just excuse us. Here's our Languages Classroom book. We wrote this back in 2009. It was published through ASCD, and Bill's going to tell you a little bit about that.
The book, Languages Classroom, has 5 different chapters that sort of flesh out our framework for working effectively with English language learners. And they are content reading strategies, higher order thinking, teacher, involved assessment, total participation techniques where we flesh out some more TPTs for you, and then also scaffolding using visuals.
Yeah, and this framework was adopted in one of the area school districts for a period of at least 2 years. And it really, what we found, it really benefits all children. And it's not just your English language learners that struggle in the content reading area, but because you're starting from where they are, starting with those visuals and bringing them to the content reading, keeping the standard the same, but taking a different approach toward meeting those standards. Chats is really powerful for all children. We found that even the gifted kids just loved being able to talk through what they were learning.
And what you're looking at now is a modified version on the very back of that Language Rich Classroom book, which is the Chats Unit Planning Mat.
Yeah, the Chats Unit Planning Mat is it's downloadable, and you can. There's going to be, I think, a link after this presentation, so that you can, if you're interested in copying it, you can do that. It's a nice co-planning and co-teaching mat as well, so it's not just for individual planning, although it works both ways. We've seen, first of all, it's an 11 by 17 mat, but you can get it even larger. And so we have a 6-foot mat, for example, that becomes a group planning mat. So you have several teachers who are writing their ideas on how to meet the needs of all learners in a particular unit. So, and as you're co-planning, different teachers bring their different areas of expertise to the table, and they are then meeting together and saying, well, I think you could use this idea for XYZ unit, or that idea. And so they're bringing those strengths to the table. Please feel free to email us at languagerich@gmail.com. We do workshops, of course, on TPTs and chats. And we have a TPT Workshop Kit under development and a trainer-trainer workshops with that TPT kit. So give us an email if you're interested in being notified of that. And just want to say thank you.
We do have some.
Go for it.
We do have some questions that are coming in, so if you don't mind, if we could take the last 15 minutes of the presentation to address some of the questions.
Absolutely.
Sure, absolutely.
Okay, the first question we have is from Amy, and she wanted to know how you ensure all of the students participate in a group setting when you're using bounce cards.
Usually they're working in pairs or threes, and you're doing a lot of circulating. That's one of the biggest things that you need to do as you're working with TPTs. You definitely need to circulate, carry around your clipboard and your Post-its, and take those anecdotal records as you're assessing your students. Bill, do you have anything to add?
And once the students, I think, are shown, modeled how to use those bounce cards, we found that they really do enjoy it because it helps them structure those conversations. And so I think once you show, model them, circulate, and then they are often, I think, going to be able to be up and running in terms of using them effectively.
Okay. And
Actually, I just wanted to say,
yes.
I noticed there was a question. There were several people who talked about sticky notes at the time of the Chalkboard Splash. Did you happen to pick that up?
Yes, if you'd like to talk about that.
Yeah, well, I didn't actually, I don't have the exact questions, but I'd like to address it. Sticky notes are great. The Chalkboard Splash is kind of fun because it's big. The text is big, and everybody can read it. Just doing a nice little walk around, they can read it. The debriefing portion where they're looking for similarities or differences or surprises, they're able to just kind of walk and carry their little notebook around. And I think that sticky notes would be a little too tiny to look at. We do use sticky notes for one of our picture walks, which is a total participation technique that is a scaffold with visuals that we talked about in our first book, which is actually, if you go on ASCD Edge, you can download, there's a picture on there of a picture walk.
But I would encourage teachers, if they don't feel that they can take up their whiteboard, chalkboard, to give those Post-its to their students, and they could at least still stand up again, seeing that everyone's engaged and walking to a respective wall and then putting their answers on that wall. So they can be on the board that so many kiddos love. But absolutely, I think the Post-its you could use as well effectively.
That is right. And we have a few questions coming in about applying these total participation techniques to older students, high schoolers, upper middle school kids. Can you explain how to effectively do that?
Yeah. Let me just say the book is written based on a middle school experience. We did not talk at all about note-taking, guided note-taking, but it's actually my favorite chapter. It's chapter 7, and it's using activities that are more definitely not focused on the younger grades. One of the most common questions that we get is, how do I take the book and use it in kindergarten, first and second grade experiences? So the pictures, photographs that we showed are from our current research right now in a K2 building. But the book itself has a lot of examples of working with older learners. And in particular, that guided note-taking chapter has some activities that are really neat. The debate team carousel and the pause star rank, which some of my favorite activities, which I use all the time.
It's definitely geared toward, as Pérsida said, that middle or high school level. And I think actually if you are in the kindergarten, first grade, maybe even second, you would have to tweak them. So they're geared right for that level.
Thank you for clearing that up. We also wanted to had a question. Oh, go ahead, Pérsida.
Well, I just want to say the other thing is we use them all the time in the university. So try them out. And it does have a lot toward the middle and high. Go for it.
Great. And how would you use these techniques in, say, a math class? Are there any suggestions you have?
Yes. Go for it.
Yeah. Well, first of all, math now is so language-based, and so it's built in often for having those discussions, and it's not just the answer, but how did you get that? And so using those Chalkboard Splash, the other TPTs that we talk about in the book for that note-taking, for that movement, 3 in a row, so many of them, they would just be perfect for that math Again, especially the way that we teach math now, which is so language-based, where you have to explain and describe what's going on in your head.
Now, I think that there are some limitations in our book with math. There are some activities that you could not use. But I do think that math repeatedly using even just the whiteboard holdups, that's something as simple as that, you know, a laminated 5x6 index card or 5x8, I can't remember the size, and a Crayola crayon, just to have students work it out and show you that they've got it and be able to explain it to each other, be able to articulate their thinking, I think is very important in a math class.
Mm-hmm.
And Veronica would like to know if you could describe some of the movement total participation techniques.
Yeah, one of my favorite ones are the 3 in a row, where the students are given this paper that has 9 boxes, almost like a Hollywood squares for those of you who are old enough to remember that. The Hollywood type of a square format, and each box has a question, and then the students would stand up and they would go to other students and they would ask that student a question for that particular box, and if the student knows it, they then would share the answer to the person with the paper. They would write that answer down and then go around until you eventually have all 9 squares filled. Or you could do it like a tic-tac-toe. The first one who would have those 3 in a row, maybe sit on down, then might be the winner. So 3 in a row is one of my favorite. And again, we've seen it effectively in elementary, middle schools. We use it all the time as well at the university. And the kiddos get up and they're moving around. You know, I think all of us know that, especially as teachers, instructors, that if we ourselves get up and are moving, we're getting that blood circulating, we're getting that food for the brain, and that helps us be better students. And I think, you know, at least in one of the observations that Pérsida and I really do make is that our kiddos sometimes are just sitting too long in our classrooms. If we can become instantly better if we just get them up and out of the seat and moving. And 3 in a row, I know for me personally, it's one of my favorites.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, and we have a question from Alicia. She would like to know how you avoid students waiting and tagging along with other students' responses during hold-up activities.
Well, one of the things that you're going to need to do as a teacher is just really circulate so that you're listening to that interaction and prompting kids. You're right. If you stand at the front of the room while the interaction is going on, you will have one person doing all the work. We know that is not ideal. So you've got to get out there, and if you see Marcos is not participating, and Marcos, what do you think? You know, just a simple little prompt. Let me tell you, even in the college, even in the university, when we do a hold-up, we have to look at that student, that college student who is not holding it up and say, what are your thoughts? I mean, we have to prompt them. Otherwise, even in the university, they won't hold up the cards. So, for example, I did a hold up with the 3 different ways of gathering evidence of validity the other day. And boy, they just want to hide. Students want to hide. It doesn't matter even if they're in higher education. So you have to circulate, and you have to force yourself to do it, to walk around, take those notes, and just get students to interact.
There are times, though, that I do believe that there can be a value for a student to simply tag along, if you will. It might be a newly arrived ELL or a student who's really struggling. And so I think there is value for them at those times to stand and just to copy or to tag along and see what others are doing. And so, as Pérsida said, it sort of depends on the students. And you're going to know your students obviously best. You're going to know those that need to just tag along. Those, conversely, might be trying to hide, and they won't be able to hide because, again, you're throwing out, as we said earlier, every 10, 12 minutes a pebble for each of those students to hold and to grab as opposed to a beach ball.
The other thing is, if you, for certain activities, if you always ripple it, in other words, if you always start with the individual student first, whether that be, and one of the most powerful things I think is as simple as a quick write that we don't use enough because we just want to, you know, give students the answer. Instead, if we were to collect those quick writes, you know, we get a much better feel for where students are.
So would these techniques be similar if you're using them, say, a 12th grader who has behavior or attendance problems, who might just think, oh, it's so lame, you know?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah, because they, again, they're not going to be able to hide. They're going to have to be constantly showing you what's in their head, how they're processing. And as I think I mentioned earlier, boy, when you do that, you're just really able to, I think, sort of cut down some of those behavior issues because they're not giving those opportunities to get off track and to be zoning and whatnot, because they're constantly having them prove to you that I am with you, I'm listening, and I'm getting what you're trying to give me.
Now, if you really are struggling with classroom management, then you might want to do a chart paper splash in the same way that that first grade teacher did, where she brings the chart paper to the students. Just some simple modification like that, as opposed to having them all walk up. So you kind of have to judge it in terms of where you are in terms of your classroom management skills and what you think is going to cause more chaos than it's worth. So, but you do. I think it does reduce, like Bill said, some of the behavior issues. Some of the behavior issues that we have are because kids are so disengaged, and they're basically looking for something to do.
That's a great point. So it would go as far as changing even the culture of your classroom. So
absolutely. And as again, there's just so many student testimonials in the book that talk about how it changed the culture for them in that classroom and how they're able to celebrate what's going on.
Well, with that, then I'm going to take control of the presentation and provide a little bit more information for our participants. Pick up a copy of Total Participation Techniques from shop.ascd.org if you want to learn more about applying these techniques to the older students, or just learning more of the techniques that we couldn't cover today in the webinar.
And if you also want to see what we really look like as well.
Right, that's the big secret. And thank you so much for joining us today. We'll see you next time.